The text came in at 2:17 in the afternoon. I know the exact time because I was sitting at my desk reviewing a vendor contract, and my phone buzzed face up on the glass surface, and I saw the first few words of the preview before I even reached for it. Wiki, I've decided to stay. I picked it up. I read the whole thing. I set it back down on the desk. Then I sat there for a very long time without moving. The message read, Wiki, I've decided to stay here with someone who actually deserves me. I think you know this has been coming for a long time. Don't make this harder than it has to be. 14 years of marriage. 2 children. A house I had spent 4 years renovating from the frame up, stone by stone, wall by wall, every window specified and every floor chosen with a level of care I gave to nothing in this world more than I gave to that house. And my wife, Lavisa, had just ended it in a WhatsApp message from Paris. From a city 5,000 kilometers away, in a room I had never been inside, next to a man whose name was not yet in the message. She had left 11 days ago. The trip was supposed to be 10 days. I looked at the text again. Read it a second time, the way you reread something hoping the words will rearrange themselves into something that makes more sense, something that fits differently, something that has a different meaning if you approach it from a slightly different angle. They didn't. 3 words. That was my reply. Okay. Come home. I'll tell you what happened after that. But first, let me tell you how we got here. Because the story of how Lavisa and I arrived at that Tuesday afternoon, her in Paris, me at a desk in Lahore reading a message that was written to wound, is the kind of story that, in hindsight, shows you every single thing you refused to see when it was happening directly in front of you. The signs you filed away without meaning to. The silences you told yourself were just the natural quiet of a long marriage. The small distances that grew so slowly you didn't notice them adding up until the total was too large to pretend away. Before I tell you about the message, let me tell you about the marriage. My name is Wiki. I'm 41 years old. I run a mid-sized architectural firm that I built from a single rented office, 2 employees, and an ambition that had no business being as large as it was given what I was starting with. That firm now employs 31 people across 2 cities, and it has my name on the door, and every contract we have signed and every building we have touched has been earned through the kind of work that doesn't announce itself, it just accumulates, year after year, until one day you look around and realize that what you've built is substantial. I've spent 20 years drawing buildings that other people would live and work inside for generations. I've thought deeply about what makes a space feel right, what makes a wall hold, what makes a structure not just functional but genuinely good to inhabit. I understand load-bearing elements. I understand foundations. I understand the difference between a crack that is cosmetic and a crack that goes all the way through. And in that same 20 years, I apparently failed to apply any of that understanding to the structure of my own home. To the marriage that was the actual foundation of everything else. I built the firm. I built the house. And I quietly, incrementally allowed the thing that held both of those buildings up to be neglected in ways I am still, honestly, working to understand. I met Lavisa when I was 24 years old and she was 22. We were both at a mutual friend's engagement celebration in Islamabad, a rooftop event, late summer, the kind of evening where the light is doing something generous and everyone looks a little better than they do in ordinary daylight. She was standing near the far railing with a glass of juice in her hand, arguing with considerable passion about spatial proportion in traditional Pakistani architecture, making a point with which the man she was arguing with was clearly not equipped to engage. I introduced myself by disagreeing with her. It was not, in retrospect, the safest opening. But it was the honest one. She was studying interior design at the time and she had the kind of opinions that hadn't been borrowed from somewhere else, they were genuinely hers, arrived at through looking carefully at things and thinking seriously about what she saw. She looked at me when I disagreed, this moment of assessment that lasted about 3 seconds, and then she said, "Let's see if you can back that up." I could. We talked for 3 hours. I called her the next day. I called her the day after that as well, which may have been too soon, but she picked up both times, which told me something. We dated for 2 years. We got married in a ceremony in Lahore that my mother had been planning in her head since approximately the moment I turned 30 and that Leviza's mother had strong and frequently expressed opinions about from beginning to end. It was the kind of wedding that is beautiful in its chaos, that produces photographs which later make you understand what the word radiant actually means when it's applied to a person. We were happy. Genuinely, straightforwardly happy, the kind of happy that doesn't feel significant while it's happening because you assume it's just the permanent condition of your life from this point forward. The early years had the particular texture of two people building things simultaneously, me the firm, her a small interior consultancy she started from nothing and grew through sheer determination, and a client list she developed entirely on the strength of her own reputation. Hira was born in our 3rd year, and she arrived with the absolute authority of someone who had decided the world was going to accommodate her rather than the other way around. Jack came 2 years after that, quieter than his sister, more observant, with a habit of watching situations fully before commenting that I recognized as something I had also done at his age and that his mother found both admirable and slightly unnerving. The house was the project that contained all of us. A 1970s property in the older part of DHA, a genuine wreck when I purchased it, the kind of building that less stubborn people walk through once and leave, and that architects walk through and immediately start mentally rebuilding. I bought it because I could see what it was underneath its current condition, and because I have always believed more in what things can become than in what they currently are. Leviza and I spent 4 years on that house. 4 years of decisions, arguments, compromises, and the occasional moment of complete agreement that felt like a gift. She chose the stone for the kitchen floors, a gray-veined marble that I initially thought was too cool for the light we got in that room, and that turned out to be exactly right. I drew the stair profile, a floating design that she said looked too modern for the house and that I said would age into the house over time, and we were both partially correct. We argued about the color of the front door for 6 weeks. 6 weeks. I wanted dark charcoal. She wanted that specific shade of dark olive green. We compromised by doing a paint test on the actual door and then standing outside and looking at it in the morning light, the afternoon light, the evening light, until she turned to me one evening and said, "You know I'm right," and I looked at the door and said, "You're right." She was right. The door is still that dark olive green. It will be that color as long as that door is standing. That was 7 years ago. And somewhere in the 7 years between that moment outside on the path looking at the door and the afternoon I read the message from Paris, something changed in us that I did not see clearly enough, soon enough, to do anything about it. I should tell you about Sylvia. Because Sylvia is, in some ways, the pivot point of this story, even though she is not its central character. And understanding Sylvia means understanding something about how these situations develop, not with sudden drama, not with a single reckless decision, but with a series of small accepted distances that eventually add up to a life that has been quietly hollowed out. Sylvia was a friend from Leviza's university years in Karachi. They had been close during their studies, the way people are close during formative years when everything is new and the person next to you is experiencing it alongside you. They had drifted, as people drift, and then reconnected a few years ago through social media, the modern way of finding people you thought were simply gone. Sylvia lived in Paris. She had married a French architect, a man named Damien who worked in urban development, large-scale projects, the kind of work that involves government and infrastructure and the patient accumulation of approvals over years. Sylvia visited Lahore 18 months before the Paris text. She stayed for a week. She came to our house for dinner twice. She sat at our dining table, the one Leviza had sourced from a workshop in Chiniot, and she complimented the stone floors and the light through the windows and the general quality of the space in a way that was genuinely perceptive, not just polite. I liked her. She was interesting. She was the kind of person who has actually thought about things rather than simply absorbing the opinions of whoever they were last near. Her French was better than her Urdu at this point, but she slipped between the two with the easy fluency of someone who has lived in between two worlds long enough that both feel native. She left after a week. Leviza was sad when she went, the way you're sad when someone from a part of your life that you'd almost stopped thinking about suddenly walks back through and reminds you what that chapter felt like. I thought nothing of Sylvia beyond that visit. I had no reason to. What I didn't know, what I would not understand until long after the Paris text, was that Sylvia had brought someone with her to one of those dinners. Not to our house specifically. To a dinner she and Lavisa had with a group of people, at a restaurant, one of the evenings during that week when Sylvia was in the city and the two of them were spending time together while I worked late, as I did most evenings, because that is what I did. The someone she brought was a man named Kadimi. Pakistani by birth, Paris-based by choice for the last 12 years. Civil engineer turned real estate developer, the kind of man who moves between worlds with the ease that comes from having money and no particular attachment to any one place as home. He had met Damien through work, and through Damien he had met Sylvia, and through Sylvia he had come to Lahore for a brief trip that coincided with her visit. He met Lavisa over dinner. That dinner that I was not at because I was working. I learned all of this later. Much later. After the text, during the weeks when things came apart and I finally had the full picture to look at. At the time, I knew none of it. At the time, I knew only that my wife seemed lighter somehow after Sylvia's visit. More animated. More present at dinner for a few days afterwards. I attributed it to the pleasure of reconnecting with someone from a formative period of her life. I was glad for her. I told her so. I filed nothing away. I was not paying enough attention to file anything away. In January, Lavisa told me that Sylvia had invited her to Paris. She told me over dinner, on a Wednesday night, Hira doing homework at the table beside us, Jack already in bed. She mentioned it the way you mention something that is already mostly decided but that is being presented as a conversation because conversations are the form this sort of thing takes. A 10-day visit. Just the two of them. Old friends catching up in a beautiful city. She showed me what she was describing as an itinerary, the Marais neighborhood, day trips, museums, a few restaurants she'd been reading about. She had already looked at flights. She mentioned the dates with the specificity of someone who has already thought about this more than once. I looked at the dates. I looked at the itinerary. I looked at my wife, who had not been away on her own in years and who, now that I saw it described in front of me, was clearly in need of something that our ordinary life was not providing. I told her to go. I meant it. I said she deserved it. I said I would handle the children and the house and she should rest and enjoy herself and not think about any of it. She kissed me on the cheek. She said, "You're a good man, Wiki." A good man. Not my man. Not the man I love or the man I can't imagine being without. A good man. The phrasing of something you respect at a comfortable professional distance. The kind of thing you say about someone you appreciate but have already partly let go of. I didn't hear it that way then. I'm being honest with you about that. She left on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks later. I drove her to the airport with both children in the car because Hira had wanted to come and because Jack had a firm opinion about the goodbye being conducted properly, which meant being there in person. Lavisa checked her bags. She crouched down and held Hira for a long moment and said something into her hair that I couldn't hear. She told Jack she would bring back the proper Eiffel Tower keychain, the good one, not the cheap ones by the gate. He told her the difference was obvious and she should use her judgment. She laughed. She waved once at the door. Then she was through it. The first week, she texted regularly. Photos of the city from her phone, the kind of images that look exactly like the Paris you've seen in 100 pictures but that still somehow manage to look like somewhere specific, somewhere real. A short video of a street market. A photo of a meal at a small bistro, the kind of place with 6 tables and a handwritten menu. A message saying the weather was cold but good, that she and Sylvia had walked for miles and she'd forgotten how much she liked walking without any particular destination. She seemed happy. Genuinely, visibly happy. I noticed it in the tone of her messages, in the brevity and lightness of them, in the sense they gave of someone who was present in what she was doing rather than partially somewhere else. I was glad. That is the honest thing. I was glad that she was happy, and I was busy with the firm, and the children were fine, and the week passed the way weeks pass when everything is approximately in its place. In the second week, the messages became shorter. Not absent. Just shorter. Less frequent. A day would pass between them, then two. When I messaged her she replied, but with a lag. I told myself she was busy. That she and Sylvia were out in the city, doing things, living fully in the 10 days and not sitting at a phone monitoring the thread with her husband at home. On day 10, the day she was supposed to fly back, I sent her a message in the morning asking about her flight time. She didn't reply until late afternoon. She said she'd tell me in the morning. I looked at that message for a moment. Then I told myself I was reading something into a logistical delay, put the phone face down, and went to finish reviewing the drawings I'd been working on. I went to sleep that night without any particular sense of alarm. I had no sharp feeling, no specific warning from my gut, no dramatic premonition. I am telling you this because I want to be accurate. The way these things happen is not the way they happen in films. There is no ominous music, no foreshadowing you recognize in the moment. There is just ordinary life, ordinary evening, ordinary sleep. And then morning. And then Hira eating breakfast and Jack complaining about the school bag that was still missing a strap from 2 weeks ago and me telling him we'd fix it over the weekend. And then the school run. And then the office. And then the vendor contract open on the desk. And then 2:17 in the afternoon. And then the text. Wiki, I've decided to stay here with someone who actually deserves me. I think you know this has been coming for a long time. Don't make this harder than it has to be. I read it. I set the phone down. I looked out the window of my office at the street below, the ordinary mid-afternoon life of a city going about its business without any awareness that something had just happened in a room on an upper floor. Someone who actually deserves me. 5 words inside those 14 words that told me everything and nothing simultaneously. They told me there was a person. They told me she had been moving toward him for long enough that she now had the language of deserving, the specific vocabulary of a decision that has been forming slowly and then solidified. The word deserves does not come from a week in Paris. The word deserves comes from a comparison that has been running in someone's mind for months, possibly longer, the ongoing calculation of what they have and what they believe they should have and the gap between the two. I did not scream. I did not pick up the phone and call her immediately with the full weight of what I was feeling. I did not call Danish into my office and tell him what had happened. I did not go through the particular performance of public devastation that some part of me recognized this moment seemed to be inviting. I typed 3 words. Okay. Come home. I put the phone face down on the desk. And then I sat there, in the quiet of my office, with the vendor contract still open in front of me and the afternoon light coming through the window, and I thought about those 3 words for a long time. Not because I was uncertain about them. Because I was certain about them and I wanted to understand why. Okay is not agreement. It is not forgiveness. It is not the surrender of someone who has been hurt so badly they have simply stopped resisting. Okay is acknowledgement. I have received this information. I am still standing. I have not been destroyed by this. The building is still up. Come home is not pleading. It is not desperation. It is not the cry of someone grasping for what they're losing. Come home is the opening of a door. It says, this is still where home is. Whatever you have done in the city you are in, whatever you have decided in rooms I was not part of, the door here is still a door and not a wall and I am still on the other side of it. 3 words that communicated all of that without performing any of it. That is what I wanted to say. That is what I said. Then I closed the vendor contract, told Danish I was taking the afternoon, and drove to my parents' house. Not to tell them everything. Not to break down in the living room while my mother made tea and my father said the kinds of things fathers say when they're trying to hold their children together while also holding themselves together. Just to be in a space that had a different quality of stability than anywhere else I could go. The house I grew up in. The walls that knew me before any of this existed. My father was in his study when I arrived. He's a man who has spent a lifetime reading and building and thinking carefully before speaking, and he looked at me for 3 seconds when I walked in the door and said, "Sit down, son." He always knows. Across 41 years, he has almost never not known something was wrong before I said a word about it. I've spent a long time trying to understand how that works and I still can't explain it. It's not intuition exactly. It's more like he has always paid the kind of close attention to the people he loves that makes information unnecessary because he's already watching. I told him what had happened. Plainly, without embellishment, without performing the emotions because the emotions were already fully present and didn't need dressing up. I told him about the text, about the reply I'd sent, about the phrase "someone who actually deserves me" and what I thought it meant. He listened. He did not interrupt. He did not say immediately the things that people say in these moments, the sympathetic sounds and the expressions of disbelief. He let me finish. He sat with what I'd told him for a while. Then he said, "What do you actually know right now?" I thought about it properly. What did I know? I knew what the message said. I knew there was a person. I didn't know his name, not yet. I didn't know how long it had been happening. I didn't know whether Leviza was acting from a genuine and long-considered decision or from a moment of feeling in a foreign city that had not yet been tested against ordinary life. I didn't know what Sylvia's role was, though I was beginning to form some thoughts about it. I didn't know what she wanted to happen next, because the message said "I've decided," but it didn't say "and here is what that looks like." Then, my father said, "Don't respond to what you don't know. Respond only to what you do." It is the best thing anyone has ever said to me. I have thought about it almost every day since. What I did know was, my children were at school and they would need to be picked up at 3. My wife was in Paris and had sent a message that required a response but not necessarily an immediate or emotional one, not yet, not without more information. My house was standing. My firm was operational. And I had already made the right reply, 3 words, measured, not reactive, not closed. The rest was still to be discovered. My father made tea. We sat for a while in the particular silence of 2 men who have said what needs to be said and don't need to fill the remaining space with more words. The afternoon light moved across the room. I drank the tea. At some point my mother appeared in the doorway, looked at me, looked at my father, and quietly went back to whatever she had been doing, an act of understanding so complete it didn't require a word. I left at 2:30. I picked up the children at 3. I did not tell them anything. Hira asked where her mother was and I said the trip had been extended a few days and she'd be home soon. Jack asked if she'd remembered the keychain. I told him I'd check with her. We had dinner together, the 3 of us, rice and a dal I made from memory rather than measurement, and I was present, genuinely, fully present in a way that cost me something that evening but that mattered more than anything else I could have done. She didn't reply to my 3 words for 6 hours. In those 6 hours, I made 2 calls. The first was to my lawyer, Natasha. She handles the firm's legal affairs, contracts, commercial disputes, the occasional intellectual property matter. She is thorough, fast, and she does not waste words. I told her I needed to understand my options regarding a potential dissolution of my marriage and what protections existed around the business assets. She asked when it had started. I told her the message came that afternoon but that the actual situation had probably been developing for longer. She said to get her the firm's documentation, the property records, the financial account structure, and to not move anything until she'd looked at it and told me where I stood. The call was 18 minutes long. When I hung up, something in my chest settled in a way it hadn't since the message arrived. Not because the situation had improved, it hadn't, not in any material sense. But because I was working the problem rather than sitting in the middle of it. There is a version of grief that makes you entirely passive, that turns you into someone things happen to rather than someone who decides what happens next. I have never been that version. I have always been the kind of person who, even in the worst moments, is already moving. The second call I made that evening was to my brother. Danish, my brother, not the partner at the firm, though they share a name, which has always been a source of minor confusion, is 2 years younger than me and the person who knows me better than almost anyone alive. He picked up immediately. He always picks up. I told him what had happened, and he was quiet for a long time in the particular way he gets when he's processing something that is genuinely serious rather than the ordinary difficulties of ordinary life. Then he said, "What do you need?" Not "I'm so sorry" or "I can't believe it" or any of the things that are sympathetic but not useful. Just, "What do you need?" I said I needed someone to know, and I needed him not to do anything yet, not to call anyone, not to tell anyone, not to start the process of surrounding me with the well-meaning concern that can sometimes feel like being buried before you've had the chance to work out if you're still alive. He said, "Understood. Call me when you need me." And he left it there. At 10:47 that evening, a new message from Lavisa. "I knew you'd respond like that. Calm. Controlled. Like everything's fine. That's the problem, Wiki. Nothing was ever a problem to you." I read it. I read it a second time. I understood what it was, a provocation, or maybe more accurately, a test. She had sent a message designed to detonate something and received 3 words, and now she was trying to generate the reaction she hadn't gotten. Calm is the problem, Wiki. Nothing is ever a problem to you. The particular bitterness of being criticized for the thing that kept your family stable. I called her. Not texted. Called, because texts are too easy to misread, and because I needed to hear her voice and she needed to hear mine, because some conversations have to happen as sound rather than as text on a screen. She picked up on the 4th ring. I could hear a room behind her, quiet, interior, not outside, not a restaurant. A private space. Lavisa. Wiki. Her voice was careful. The careful voice of someone who has prepared for a conversation and is trying to hold to the shape of it. "I'm not going to ask you to explain yourself on the phone," I said. "But I'm asking you to come home so we can talk properly. Face to face. Whatever you've decided, whatever this is, you owe me that. And more than me, you owe your children the conversation in person." A pause. "Kadimi and I." "Not tonight," I said. "That name can wait for a face-to-face conversation. Come home, Lavisa." Another pause. Longer. I could hear her breathing. I could hear the silence of wherever she was. "I'll think about it," she said. "You do that," I said. And I ended the call. I sat in the study for a long while after that. The house was quiet. The children were sleeping. The dark olive-green front door was closed against the night. I could hear nothing from outside except the distant sound of the city being a city, which it was doing without any particular concern for what was happening on the 41st floor of my study. What I felt in that room, and I want to be precise about this because I think imprecision about feeling is part of what goes wrong in these situations, was not rage. Was not devastation. Was not the specific vertigo of a man who cannot believe what has happened to him. What I felt was something more structural. Like someone who designs buildings and has just understood that a load-bearing wall has been compromised. You don't scream at the wall. You don't perform despair in front of it. You go very still and you assess it, carefully, systematically, asking yourself what failed and when and what it means for everything that was standing on top of it. I went to bed. I slept approximately 4 hours. I got up. I made breakfast. I took the children to school. And then I came home to the house and I started going back through things. Not looking for evidence. I want to be very clear about the distinction. I was not building a legal case. I was not looking for the image or the message or the document that would prove something I could wave in front of someone. I was trying to understand a timeline. Because the message Lavisa had sent me did not say I met someone in Paris. It said someone who actually deserves me. Present tense. Not past, not recent. The word deserves implies an ongoing comparison. It implies a relationship that has duration. It implies she had not decided in 11 days but had been deciding for considerably longer. What I found, over the course of a few hours, looking at things I should probably have noticed earlier but that I had filed away without acknowledging what I was filing, was that Sylvia's role in this story was not as simple as I had believed. Sylvia had not simply reconnected with an old friend and invited her to Paris. Sylvia had been the bridge between her old friend and a man named Kadimi, deliberately, knowingly, and over a period of months. The dinner during Sylvia's visit to Lahore, the one I hadn't been at because I was working, had not been coincidental. Kadimi had been in Lahore at the same time as Sylvia, staying at a hotel nearby, and the dinner had been arranged. I learned this through a chain of things that I will not describe in detail because some of them involved conversations I should not have needed to have and questions I should not have needed to ask. But the picture became clear. The dinner 18 months ago. The contact that followed. 7 months of something that Lavisa would later describe to me as I don't know what it was at first before she admitted that she had known precisely what it was. The Paris trip was not a holiday with an old friend. It was a planned meeting with a man she had been in contact with for more than a year. I sat with that information in the quiet of my study. I did not act on it immediately. I made notes on a single piece of paper that I folded and placed in the top drawer of my desk. Then I made a second cup of coffee and I went back to the drawings on my desk because the firm still existed and the project still needed to be reviewed and the world continued to require the things that I did for it regardless of what was happening in my personal life. That is not coldness. I want to explain that, because I have been accused of coldness in the period since, by people who learned pieces of this story and drew the obvious and incomplete conclusion. What it is, what I have always believed it to be, is the understanding that the most important decisions you make are made in the moments when you most want to react. And that reacting in those moments, giving the full force of your feeling to the moment before you understand what the situation actually is almost always the thing that makes what comes next worse rather than better. My father taught me that. Not in those words, but in practice, over the course of a lifetime of watching him navigate difficulty with a steadiness I spent years trying to understand and that I'm still learning. She came home on a Thursday. For days after the text. I had not sent another message in those 4 days. Not one. I had spoken to her once, on the phone, the evening the message arrived, and I had said what needed to be said and then I had left the space between us for her to fill or not fill as she chose. She chose to fill it on a Thursday afternoon, at 2 o'clock, with a key in the front door. I heard her key. I heard the familiar sound of her bag dropping onto the entryway floor, that specific thud of a heavy bag meeting a specific floor, the sound of someone arriving home who has been carrying something for a long time and is grateful to set it down. A reflex she'd had for years. The reflex of this specific door and this specific floor and this specific life. I walked out from the study. She looked different. Not bad, not good. Different in the way that someone looks when they have spent time in a context that pulled something out of them that wasn't visible before, or that wasn't being allowed to be visible before, and now it's showing. She was wearing a coat I didn't recognize. Her hair had been trimmed. Small things. But I noticed them the way I notice change details in a space I've designed myself, not because I was looking for them, but because I know the space and therefore I see when something has shifted. "You're here," I said. "I'm here," she said. We went to the living room. The stone floors. The afternoon light doing what afternoon light does through those windows, which is exactly what I designed them to do. She sat on the sofa. I sat in the chair across from her, not beside her, and I think we both understood the meaning of that geography without needing to address it. She spoke first. I didn't plan it. I said nothing. I waited. When Sylvia came to Lahore, the dinner, the one I went to while you were at the office, Kadimi was there. I'd met him briefly before, but that was the first real conversation. And I didn't think anything of it. That's the truth. I didn't think it was going to be anything. But it was something, I said. Eventually. Yes. When? About 7 months after Sylvia visited. Maybe 8. It was gradual. Messages at first. Long conversations. He understood some things about me that, she stopped. Started again. I know how that sounds. Tell me the truth, I said. Not unkindly. Precisely. There is a difference and it matters. She did. Or she told me as much of the truth as she could manage in one sitting, which is more truth than most people give in these moments. 7 months properly. Before that, she said, she wasn't sure what it was. I asked if she told Sylvia. She said yes, from early on. I asked what Sylvia had said. She was quiet for a moment and then said, she encouraged it. That landed in its particular way. And Paris was planned, I said. Yes. From the beginning. A pause. From when Sylvia invited me. Yes. I nodded slowly. Not as a performance. As the physical response of someone absorbing something that confirms what they already suspected but that still costs something to hear confirmed out loud. Did you come home because you want to be here? I asked. Or because you weren't ready to make the final decision? She looked at me directly. She has always been direct when it costs her something. That is something I have always respected about her, even in the worst moments. Honestly? Please. I don't know, she said. I came home because when you replied with 3 words and nothing else, no anger, no devastation, no long message, I didn't know what that meant. And I realized I needed to come home and find out. And what does it mean? I asked. I was hoping you'd tell me, she said. It means what it says, I said. I received your message. I'm still standing. The door is still open. But I'm not coming to get you. You make the choice. That was always going to be the choice you make. She sat with that for a while. I know, she said finally. I know. The children came home from school at 3. Hira walked in and saw her mother on the sofa and erupted into the specific joy of a child who has been told their mother would be home in a few days and finds her home today. She launched herself at Leviza with a ferocity that made Leviza laugh, a real laugh, the first real sound in that house in several days, and they held each other for a long moment that I watched from the doorway. Jack came in behind his sister, saw the situation, set down his school bag, walked to his mother with considerably more dignity than his sister, and accepted her hug with the gravity of someone conducting a formal reunion. Then he said, "Did you get the keychain?" Leviza laughed again. She reached into her bag and produced the keychain, the proper one, the good one, not the cheap version by the gate. Jack examined it with seriousness and declared it acceptable. I watched all of this from the doorway. And then I went to the kitchen to make tea, because someone had to, and because some moments need a practical action happening beside them to make them bearable. Over the next 3 months, Leviza and I had the most honest conversations we had ever had in 14 years of marriage. I don't say that as a romantic observation. I say it because it's true and because the truth of it is uncomfortable. We should have been having those conversations years earlier, in the ordinary evenings of a long marriage, before the distances accumulated to the point where someone was in Paris making a decision about her life while her husband was at a desk 5,000 kilometers away reviewing a vendor contract. We saw a counselor named Maria. She was recommended by a colleague of mine whose marriage had gone through a different but similarly serious difficulty 2 years earlier. Maria had a way of sitting with silence that I initially found disconcerting. She wasn't filling gaps, she was creating them deliberately, because in gaps people say what they would have managed not to say if the conversation had kept moving. In the second session, Maria asked Leviza, "What did you feel was missing?" Leviza was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I felt like furniture. I felt like I was beautifully arranged in a well-designed life, but that I wasn't actually being looked at. That nobody was asking what I thought about being where I was." I heard that. I sat with it. I didn't defend myself against it. Because the thing about an accurate observation, even when it comes from a context of choices that hurt you, is that accuracy matters more than the context. She was describing something real. She was describing the particular way that two capable, competent, busy people can be completely present to their work and to their children and to the logistics of a shared life and simultaneously entirely absent to each other. That is a failure of a marriage. Not a dramatic failure. Not a single catastrophic choice. A slow, incremental, almost administrative failure. The failure of not asking. Not saying. Not looking at the person in the room and actually asking what they were thinking. I have been guilty of that. More than I was aware of while it was happening. In the third session, I said something similar. I said that I had been building things, the firm, the house, the future, as a way of expressing what I felt, and that I had not understood until recently how inadequate a structure is as a substitute for the actual act of being present to someone you love. A beautiful house is not the same as being seen. A successful firm is not the same as being known. I had provided a life. I had not always provided myself. Maria let that sit in the room for a while. In the fourth week, I asked Lavisa directly, "Is it finished with him?" "Yes," she said. I studied her face for a moment. Did he want it to be? A pause. No. Did he argue? Try to change it? Yes. He did. And I came home, she said. That was my answer. I nodded. Then I asked the question I had been building toward for several days. And Sylvia? She was very still for a moment. What about her? She knew. From early on, you said. Yes. She arranged the dinner. The one during her visit. Lavisa looked at me steadily. I don't know if she arranged it exactly. I think she believed she was giving me something I needed. She was giving Kadimi access to you, I said. Inside our home. At our table. The silence after that was a particular kind of silence. I know, Lavisa said. I know that. Is she still your friend? A long pause. The longest of the conversation. I don't know what she is to me now, she said. I don't think I've been honest with myself about that. That, I said, is probably the most honest thing you've said today. I received a message about a month after Lavisa came home. From a Paris number I didn't know. Short, in English. 3 sentences. She chose home. I thought you should know. I won't contact you again. I looked at that message for a long time, sitting at my desk late at night with the rest of the house quiet around me. What I expected to feel was some version of satisfaction. Or contempt. Or the cold specific pleasure of a man who has been told that the person who was supposed to replace him didn't get to. I expected something recognizable as winning. What I actually felt was complicated and more honest than satisfaction. I felt sad for the whole shape of it. For Kadimi in a Paris apartment sending that message. For the way people move toward each other across the enormous distances of their lives and sometimes arrive at something that cannot survive contact with the world it was supposed to replace. For the fact that he had believed she was coming fully, and she had come and then turned around. Not because I forced her. But because she chose it. Or because she chose to find out what she actually wanted when she got home, and what she found when she got here was more complex than what she believed from a distance. I deleted the message. I didn't reply. There was nothing to say to it. The communication it contained had already been communicated by the fact that she was in the room down the hall, asleep in the house we had built together, and he was in Paris. I went back to the drawings. The project needed reviewing. The building needed to be right. Here is what I chose not to do, in those months. And I think this part of the story matters as much as what I did do. I did not use any of what I knew in front of the children. Not a word, not a tone, not a meaningful glance at their mother that they would have felt even without understanding it. Whatever Leviza and I were working through, and we were working through something significant, Hira and Jack were not going to carry it. Children know more than you think they know. They read the room with an accuracy that adults underestimate. I was not going to give them a room worth reading. I did not call Sylvia's husband Damien and tell him what his wife had orchestrated. I thought about it. I spent perhaps 2 evenings genuinely considering it, running through the logic. He had a right to know, it concerned his household, his wife had been an active participant in something that affected 2 families. All of that was true. But then I thought about what that call would actually accomplish, and the answer I arrived at was, noise. It would create noise. It would take a situation that was being handled quietly and introduce a new set of people and reactions and complications that I did not need, and that would not make anything better. I chose silence instead. Sylvia had to live with what she'd done. Damien would or would not discover his wife's role in this. That was between them. I did not contact Kadimi's professional network. I had enough information about him to make some calls that would have been professionally uncomfortable for him. I chose not to, and I want to be honest about why, not because I have no capacity for that kind of move, but because it is wasteful. Destruction is loud and temporary. What you build after the destruction still has to be built. I would rather spend my energy on the building than on the pulling down. And I did not perform my pain for anyone who didn't need to see it. My father knew. My brother knew. Natasha knew the facts because she needed them. No one else needed to see me reduced to something smaller than I was. Not because I wasn't feeling it, I was feeling all of it, the whole enormous weight of it, in the quiet of my study and in the sleepless hours and in the particular grief of looking at a life you built with someone and trying to understand how it got to where it got. But grief is not a performance. It doesn't require an audience to be real. 6 months after the text from Paris, Leviza and I had a conversation on a Sunday evening. The children were asleep. The house was in that specific quiet that settles after children go to bed and before the adults remember what the next week requires of them. She said, "I want to try. Properly. If you do." I said, "Tell me what trying looks like to you." She thought about it before she answered, which I respected. Honesty. Both directions. The kind we lost somewhere, and I don't know exactly when we lost it, but we did. And I don't want to do this, any of this, without that being real. Something you wanted or something you needed, I said. Both, she said. I wanted someone to see me. I let that want take me to a place that was not fair to you or to our children. I'm not saying it was Kadimi's fault or Sylvia's fault. It was my choice. I made it. I'm saying I understand now that what I was looking for was something I should have said I was looking for here, to you, instead of going to find it somewhere else. And I didn't. And that is the thing I have to live with. I looked at my wife. Leviza, 39 years old, sitting in the room with the stone floors she had chosen and the windows I had specified, in the house we had rebuilt from the frame up together. The woman who had argued with me about proportion in traditional spaces when she was 22 years old and smiled like she was deciding whether I was worth her time. Can you live with it? She asked. I don't know yet, I said. But I'm willing to try to find out. She looked at me for a moment. That's not the romantic answer. No, I said. But it's the honest one. And you said that was what you wanted. She smiled. Small. Not the full smile, not the smile that lights the room. But something real. Something that was beginning rather than ending. Yes, she said. That's what I want. What came after that is quieter than what came before, and I think that's appropriate. The dramatic part of a story is the crisis. What follows the crisis is the actual work, which is less dramatic and more important. We continued to see Maria. We continued to have the difficult conversations that we had not been having in the years before, the conversations that feel like surgery while they're happening and lighter afterwards, the conversations that you avoid for years because they're uncomfortable and that turn out to have been the thing the marriage needed all along. I started coming home earlier 3 days a week. Not because a therapist prescribed it, but because I understood something clearly that I had been understanding abstractly for years, that you can build a perfect house and nobody will live happily in it if you're never actually inside it. The work I do matters. The firm matters. The buildings matter. But they are not a replacement for presence. They were never a replacement. I just allowed myself to behave as though they were, because presence is harder than building and building is what I know how to do. Lavisa closed the distance with Sylvia. Completely and permanently. That was her decision, arrived at over several months, and I did not ask for it or encourage it or suggest it. She got there herself. When she told me she'd made the decision, there was something in her face that looked like a specific kind of relief, the relief of someone who has let go of something they should have let go of some time ago and has finally done it. Let me tell you about the weeks in between. Because I think people hear a story like this and they imagine it moving in a clean line, crisis, then confrontation, then decision, then healing. That is not how it moves. It moves the way actual structural repair moves, which is to say, slowly, with setbacks, with moments when what looked sound turns out to need more work, with the specific frustration of making progress and then losing ground and then having to make the same progress again from a slightly different angle. There was a Tuesday evening, about 6 weeks after Lavisa came home, when we had a conversation that very nearly undid everything. It started over something ordinary. It always starts over something ordinary. We were in the kitchen after dinner, Hira and Jack already in their rooms, and I was putting away the dishes while Lavisa was reviewing something on her laptop at the table. I said something, I don't even remember exactly what now, something logistical about the week ahead, and she replied in a tone that had an edge to it, the kind of edge that comes not from the words themselves but from what's sitting underneath them and has been sitting there for a while waiting for an excuse to surface. I noticed the tone. I set down the plate I was holding. And I said, very evenly, what is it? Not a question. A request. She closed the laptop. She looked at me. And then she said something that I was not prepared for, not because it was untrue but because it was true in a way I hadn't expected her to articulate quite yet. She said, I don't know if I stayed because I wanted to. I think I stayed because I was afraid. Afraid of what? I asked. Of losing this. The children. The house. The shape of the life. Not you specifically. The structure of it. I sat down at the table. I looked at my wife. And I thought about what the honest response to that was, because the dishonest one, the one that would smooth the surface of the moment and let us move past it without addressing it, was very close and very available and would have been very easy to reach for. The honest response was, then we have a problem. She looked at me. Because I don't want to be the structure you stayed for, I said. I don't want to be the shape of a life that's convenient. If you're here because you couldn't afford to leave, financially, socially, practically, then we're not actually repairing anything. We're just maintaining a form. The silence in the kitchen after that was the kind of silence you can measure. I know, she said finally. Do you want to be here? I asked. Not in the house. Not in the life. With me. Do you want this, whatever this is that we're trying to build now, specifically? She looked at me for a long moment. And I let the moment be long. I didn't fill it. I didn't rescue her from the discomfort of the question by softening it or taking it back or making it easier to answer with something partial. I think I'm trying to find out, she said. And I think that's different from the answer being no. It is different, I agreed. But it means we're both still in the middle of this, not on the other side of it. Yes, she said. I can live with that, I said. I can live with being in the middle of something honest. What I can't live with is being inside a decision that's already been made and just hasn't been said out loud. She nodded slowly. And then she said something I have thought about more than almost anything else she has said to me in the months since. I think I've been more honest with you in the last 6 weeks than in the last 3 years, she said. And I don't know if that's the affair making me honest or if it's you making it possible to be honest or both. But I know this feels more real than anything we were doing before. And I know that matters. I sat with that for a while. It does, I said. It matters a great deal. We stayed at the table for another hour that evening. We didn't resolve everything. We didn't reach the end of the conversation that the conversation was actually about, because some conversations don't reach endings, they just pause, and you come back to them, and over time the weight of them shifts until what felt unbearable starts to feel merely difficult, and what felt merely difficult starts to feel like just the ordinary complexity of knowing someone fully. But we stayed. Both of us. At the table, in the kitchen, in the house. And that counted for something. I want to talk about my children, because I think people underestimate what children absorb during these periods, even when you're doing everything in your power to protect them from the full force of what's happening. Hyra is 13. She is her mother's daughter in that she feels things with full intensity and processes them out loud, with words and expressions and the occasional spectacularly theatrical moment. She knew something had happened during those 4 days when Lavisa was still in Paris. She didn't know what, and I didn't tell her what, but she knew. She became quieter for a while after her mother came home. More watchful. She started paying attention to the texture of rooms in the way that children do when they've sensed that the adults in their world are managing something significant. About 3 months after Lavisa came home, Hyra came to find me in my study on a Saturday afternoon. She stood in the doorway for a moment and then came in and sat in the chair across from my desk, the same chair I'd sat in the evening I told my father what had happened, which struck me only afterwards as a coincidence that felt like something more than a coincidence. She said, "Are you and Mum going to get divorced?" I looked at my daughter. 13 years old, her mother's eyes, something in the set of her chin that is entirely her own. "No," I said. "That's not where this is going." "But something happened," she said. "I'm not stupid." "You're not stupid," I agreed. "Something happened. Your mother and I went through something difficult, and we're working through it." "That's true. But we're working through it, which means we're both here and we're both choosing to be here." "What happened?" "That's between your mother and me," I said. "What I can tell you is that it had nothing to do with you or Jack. Nothing about you, nothing you did, nothing either of you could have changed. You understand that?" She looked at me steadily. "I understand that's what you're supposed to say." I almost smiled. "Fair," I said. "But in this case it's also true. You and your brother are the reason both of us are making the effort we're making. Not the only reason, but a real one. We want to give you the best version of this family that we can. And right now the best version is a family that works through hard things honestly rather than falling apart or pretending nothing happened." Hyra sat with that for a moment. "Okay," she said. "Okay. I just needed to know you weren't lying to me about the big thing," she said. "I can handle everything else if you're not lying about the big thing." She got up and left. I sat at my desk after she was gone and thought about what she'd said for a long time. "I can handle everything else if you're not lying about the big thing." I have been a father for 13 years. That is the best thing anyone in that role has ever said to me. Not the most flattering thing, not the most warm thing. But the truest thing about what a child needs from a parent, which is simply, don't lie about what actually matters. Everything else can be navigated. The big thing can't be survived in a lie. Jack's version of the same moment came later, and I already told you about it: the kitchen, the morning, the glass of milk. "Are you and Mum okay?" I said we were working on it. He said okay and went to find his school bag. But I want to say something about what that exchange actually contained, which is more than it appeared to contain. Jack is 10. He's been watching Lavisa and me for 10 years with the quiet attention of someone who takes the people in his world seriously and thinks carefully about what he observes. His question was not a small question. It was the question of someone who has done his own careful assessment and arrived at the point where he needed the information confirmed rather than guessed at. He was not asking are you happy? He was not asking is everything perfect? He was asking are you okay, which is a question about stability, about whether the foundation is still functioning, about whether the structure his whole life is built on is going to continue to stand. We're working on it was the right answer because it was true. It acknowledged that something had needed work while also communicating that the work was happening. It didn't pretend the difficulty hadn't existed. But it also didn't give him more than he needed. He took it in, assessed it with his characteristic seriousness, said okay, and went to find his school bag. He trusted me with that okay. I don't take that lightly. There is something I have been thinking about for months now that I want to say out loud, because I think it is the part of this kind of story that almost never gets said. The affair was not the disease. The affair was the symptom. I know how that sounds. I know that for a lot of people, what Lavisa did, the months of parallel life, the Paris trip, the text from a city 5,000 kilometers away, constitutes the full story. The betrayal. The wrong. The thing that defines the situation. And I am not dismissing any of that. It was a betrayal. It was wrong. The specific form it took, inviting someone into our home, into the proximity of our children, while building a separate life alongside the one we shared, that cost me something I am still understanding the full price of. But if I look at the marriage honestly, and I mean honestly, without the comfort of the simple narrative where I am the wronged party and she is the one who failed, if I look at it honestly, I see two people who built a very functional, very efficient, very accomplished life together and gradually stopped inhabiting it together in the ways that actually matter. We had schedules. We had systems. We had a house that worked and children who were thriving and a social life that appeared from the outside to be everything a life should be. What we did not have, or what we allowed to diminish over years until it was so quiet we had both stopped hearing it, was the daily practice of actually seeing each other. Of asking the questions that go below the logistics. Of saying the things that are uncomfortable to say because they reveal need, and need is uncomfortable, and when you are both capable and accomplished and busy, admitting need feels like something you should have grown past. We hadn't grown past it. Nobody grows past it. The need to be seen by the person you've chosen, the need to be known and not just admired, the need to matter to someone as a person and not as a provider or a partner in the management of a life, that need does not go away with competence or success or the acquisition of a house with exactly the right door. It just goes underground. And when it goes underground for long enough without being addressed, it finds its way out somewhere. Sometimes it finds its way out in arguments. Sometimes in distance. Sometimes, and this is what happened with Lavisa, it finds its way out in the direction of someone who appears to offer the thing that has been missing. Kadimi offered her visibility. That is what she told Maria and eventually told me. Not that he was better, not that what they had was more real, she was specific about that, careful about that, but that he looked at her. That when she spoke, he was there, fully there, without the half-presence of someone whose mind is partially on the drawings waiting at the office or the call he needs to make in the morning. I was that person. The partially present one. I built her a house. I funded the life. I was, by every objective measure, a good husband. But I was not always a present one. And presence, it turns out, is what the whole architecture of a marriage is actually built on. Not provision. Not competence. Presence. I understand this now with a clarity I could not have arrived at any other way. Which does not mean I am grateful for how I arrived at it. But I am clear about it. And clarity is the thing that allows you to build something different going forward. I had a conversation with my father about 6 months after Lavisa came home. A Sunday evening, both of us in his study, tea getting cold on the side table the way it always does when the conversation goes long enough. I told him where things stood. Not as a report, not seeking approval, just sharing the ongoing reality of it with the person I trusted most to hold it without judgment in either direction. He listened. He asked a few questions, not probing ones, just the questions of someone who wants to understand the shape of something accurately. And then he said, Did you think about walking away? Yes, I said. What stopped you? I thought about it carefully before I answered. A few things. The children, obviously. But not just them. Something else. Something about the question of who I am when the worst thing happens. I didn't want the answer to be, the man who left. Not because leaving would have been wrong, necessarily. But because I needed to know that I was capable of choosing differently. Of deciding what happened next rather than just reacting to what happened. My father nodded slowly. And, I said, I think I knew, if I was being really honest, that the marriage we had before was not the marriage I wanted for the next 30 years. And the question was whether what came after, this version, the honest one, the one that knows its own history, whether that was worth building. I decided it was worth trying to find out. And if you find out it isn't? Then I'll know I tried with clear eyes, I said. And I'll make the next decision from that place. But I wasn't going to make a permanent decision from a place of maximum pain without first finding out what was actually there when the pain subsided. My father looked at me for a long moment. You've always known how to wait for the right moment, he said. Since you were a child. You'd wait longer than anyone else at the chessboard. Longer than was comfortable. And then you'd move. You taught me that, I said. No, he said. I showed you. You taught yourself. There's a difference. We finished the tea. The evening went quiet around us. And I drove home to the house with the dark olive-green door and the stone floors and the children asleep in their rooms and the woman I had married sitting in the kitchen reading, looking up when I came in with the small, unperformed acknowledgement of someone who is genuinely glad you're home. Not performed. Real. That mattered to me. More than I would have known to say 6 months earlier. Someone asked me recently, a colleague, someone who knew the very broad outline and had drawn their own conclusions from the little they knew, whether I thought Liza had truly changed or whether she had simply come home because it was the easier path. It's a fair question. I don't dismiss it. Here's what I actually believe, after 8 months of paying close attention. I believe she has changed. Not in the way that the word changed is often used to mean that someone has become a different person, or that what they did is somehow erased. She has not become a different person. She is the same woman I married, with the same sharp mind and the same strong opinions and the same capacity for the kind of honesty that costs her something when she exercises it. What has changed is the direction of that honesty. It is pointed inward now in a way it wasn't before, at the things inside herself she had been avoiding looking at. The loneliness she felt but didn't name. The distance she experienced but didn't address. The need she had but sought to meet in a way that damaged people she loved. She is looking at those things now. With Maria. With me. In the quiet of her own thinking. And looking at them is harder, I think, than what she did in Paris. Because what she did in Paris was, in its way, an avoidance, a movement toward feeling rather than a confrontation with what she wasn't feeling in the life she had. Coming home and doing the actual work is harder than leaving was. And she is doing it. I watch her doing it. It is not the dramatic redemption of a story that wraps cleanly. It is the slow, daily, sometimes excruciating practice of choosing honesty over comfort, in small moments and large ones, again and again. That is the answer to whether she has truly changed. She is doing the work. Whether the work will be enough, whether we will be, in 2 years or 5 years or 10, what I hope we will be, I cannot tell you that with certainty. I can only tell you that the work is being done and that I am watching it happen and that I believe it is real. I want to tell you about the work itself. The actual texture of it. Because I think when people talk about repairing a marriage after something like this, they use words like healing and rebuilding and moving forward as though those things have a clear and knowable shape. They don't. What they actually look like, from the inside, is much smaller and more specific and considerably less elegant. It looks like a Tuesday evening when you're both tired and one of you says something that has more edge in it than it should, and instead of letting it pass and going to separate corners of the house you stop and say, what's actually going on right now. And you sit down, even though it's late and neither of you has the energy, and you find out what's actually going on. Not what the surface argument is about but what's underneath it, what's been sitting there for a few days without a voice, what needed to be said and wasn't. That's what it looks like. Again. And then again. The patient, repetitive practice of choosing honesty when silence is easier. It looks like Leviza showing me, one evening, an email she had received from Kadimi. Not because I asked. Not because she was obligated. But because she had decided that full transparency was the thing she needed to offer and she was going to offer it without being asked. The email was brief. It said he was moving to London for work and that he hoped she was well and meant no disruption. She had not replied. She showed me the email and said, "I wanted you to see it before I decided whether to respond." I told her the decision was hers. She wrote back 3 sentences, courteous, final, the kind of message that says clearly without cruelty that a door is closed. She showed me that response as well. That is what transparency actually looks like. Not surveillance. Not demanded access. A choice, freely made, to give someone the information that allows them to trust that what they're being told is the whole story. It looks like a Saturday morning when we took the children to a park, an ordinary Saturday, the kind that would have been unremarkable at any other point in our marriage, and Leviza slipped her hand into mine while we were walking. Not as a performance, not as a statement, just as a thing she did. And I felt the weight of that small gesture in a way I would not have felt it a year ago, because a year ago I would have taken it for granted. Now I understood what it contained. The choice of it. The fact that it was offered. We are learning, both of us, to offer things rather than assume them. To say the thing rather than expect it to be understood. To ask the question rather than interpret the silence. These are not complicated skills. They are, in fact, the simplest ones in the world. They are also the ones that the accumulated comfort of a long relationship makes it easiest to let go of, because comfort and assumption live very close together and it is easy, over years, to let one quietly become the other. We noticed what we had let happen. We named it. And we are doing the painstaking daily work of doing it differently. There is one more thing I want to say. About the 3 words themselves. Okay. Come home. I have had people who know the story, or pieces of it, tell me those 3 words were a power move. A way of controlling the narrative. Managing her. Making her feel the weight of what she had done by refusing to perform the devastation she was expecting. I understand why someone might see it that way. But that is not what those words were. Those words were the most honest 3 words I have ever said in my life. They were the truth of where I was at 2:17 in the afternoon, stated without embellishment, without strategy, without the performance of either devastation or indifference. Okay, because I had received the information and I was still standing. Come home because home was still home, and the door was still open, and whatever she had done in Paris, she was still the mother of my children and my wife and someone I had built a life with for 14 years, and that did not become nothing in the reading of a text message. The words were not tactics. They were me, in the hardest moment I had faced as an adult, deciding to be the version of myself that I actually wanted to be. That is what I want you to take from this, if you take anything. Not a technique. Not a method for handling betrayal or managing a difficult situation. The thing is simpler and more fundamental than any of that. When the worst moment arrives, and it arrives for all of us, in different forms, at different times, you have a choice about who you are inside it. You can be the version of yourself that the moment is trying to pull out of you, the version that reacts from the most wounded part of yourself, that screams or collapses or performs its pain for whoever is watching. Or you can be the version that receives the information, takes the breath, and decides. Deciding is harder. It requires staying present inside the pain rather than being swept out of yourself by it. It requires knowing your own value well enough that you don't need the other person's guilt or devastation to confirm it. It requires trusting that the most important move in any difficult moment is the one made from your deepest self, not your most wounded one. My father showed me that. The chess games of my childhood showed me that. 20 years of designing buildings and understanding what makes a structure hold showed me that. The most important move is always the one you make after you've already lost a piece. That's the move that determines whether you actually lose. I had lost something real. I made the move. Okay. Come home. She came home. About 5 months after Lavisa came home, I was in the kitchen one morning making coffee. Jack came in before school. He's 10 years old and he has a quality that I've watched develop since he was very small, the quality of watching situations carefully before he enters them, of taking his time before speaking, of waiting until he's sure. He stood beside me for a moment. Then he said, "Dad, are you and Mum okay?" I looked at him. He was watching me with the particular attention he brings to things that matter to him. "We're working on it," I said. That's the honest answer. He thought about this. Considered it with the seriousness that he gives to serious things. "Okay," he said. And then he picked up his glass of milk and went to find his school bag. I stood in the kitchen after he left. The stone floors. The morning light through the windows I had specified for exactly this light, this time of day, this particular quality of morning in this house. And I thought about the word okay, about all that it contained, about how much weight it could carry when it was deployed properly. Okay. Still here. Still working. Still building. Not finished. Not resolved. Not the clean resolution of a story that has reached its ending. Just ongoing. Moving forward with the full knowledge of what happened and the full intention of building something different with what remains. My name is Wiki. I am 41 years old. I run an architectural firm in Lahore that I built with my own hands and that has my name on the door and that is still standing. 8 months ago, my wife sent me a message from Paris telling me she had decided to stay there with someone who actually deserved her. I replied with 3 words. She came home. And what we are building now, the two of us, in this house with the dark olive green door and the stone floors and the windows that catch the light exactly the way I said they would, we are building it differently than we built it the first time. With the full knowledge of what the other person is capable of. With the full knowledge of what we ourselves are capable of. Without the innocence of not knowing, which was never really innocence, just an attention dressed up as contentment. I was asked once, in the months since, by someone who knew the broad outline of what happened, how did you know to reply with those 3 words? How did you know that was the right thing? I thought about it properly before I answered. The truth is, I didn't know. Not with certainty. What I knew was that I was not going to react in the moment of maximum pain with the full force of everything I was feeling, because that is the moment when reactions are least likely to be the thing you would actually choose if you had time to think. And I had, in those first seconds, a choice between 2 versions of myself. The version that gave the moment everything it was asking for, the call, the confrontation, the devastation in full voice. And the version that received the information, acknowledged it, and said, I am still standing. The door is still open. Come home. The second version was the one I wanted to be. It was the version my father had been showing me since I was a child. Not the version that doesn't feel anything. The version that feels everything and decides what to do with it rather than simply being carried by it. 3 words. Okay. Come home. She came home. And that is not the end of the story. It is, in many ways, the beginning of the harder one. But it is the beginning I chose. It is the beginning we are building from, brick by brick, conversation by conversation, the ordinary evenings of a life being deliberately rebuilt by 2 people who now understand exactly what they allowed to fall apart and what it cost, and who are choosing, not from innocence but from full knowledge, to build something better than what came before. That is the real thing. Not the dramatic moment. Not the text, not the reply, not the confrontation in the living room when she came home. The real thing is what happens after all of that, in the Tuesday evenings and the Saturday mornings and the small gestures that are offered rather than assumed. In the questions asked instead of the silences kept. In the choosing, again and again, to be present to the person across the table rather than present only to the version of your life that is visible from the outside. I have been building things for 20 years. Houses, offices, spaces for other people to live and work inside. I have understood, in the abstract, what it means for a structure to be sound. What it means for a foundation to hold. I understand it differently now. More completely. More personally. A sound structure is not just well designed. It is inhabited with intention. It is looked after. The cracks, when they appear, and they always appear, in any structure, given enough time and enough weight, the cracks are found and addressed before they go all the way through. That is the work. Not the dramatic renovation, not the stripping back to the bones, though sometimes that becomes necessary too. The work is the regular, unspectacular maintenance of the thing you want to last. We are doing that work. Every day. Without drama. Without spectacle. And if I have learned anything from 20 years of designing structures meant to stand, it is that a foundation built on honest material, properly mixed, properly laid, properly cured, that foundation holds. Even the ones you have to strip back to their bones and rebuild. Maybe especially those. The dark olive green door is still exactly the right color. We were right about that from the beginning. We just needed 6 weeks and a quiet Sunday evening looking at it in the fading light before we were both willing to say so. Some things are worth taking the time to get right. Some things are worth the 6 weeks of argument and the quiet Sunday evening and the willingness to stand outside and look honestly at what you have before you decide it's finished. If something in this story found you, if you've sat in the quiet of a room and had to decide what version of yourself to be in the moment that most wanted a different version, leave a comment below. I'd like to know. And if this is the kind of story you want more of, real ones, complicated ones, the ones that don't end cleanly because real stories never do, subscribe. We're just getting started here.